I'm Vicki Hogarth, and welcome to Southwest Magazine. For decades, few environmental issues in New Brunswick have generated as much debate as the use of glyphosate in our forests. Supporters argue it's an important tool for forest management. Critics say it has devastating consequences for wildlife, biodiversity, and rural communities. One of the most outspoken voices in that debate has been Rod Cumberland, a wildlife biologist, former deer project leader with New Brunswick Department of Natural Resources, educator, and longtime advocate for New Brunswick's deer herd. Cumberland has spent years researching and speaking publicly about what he believes are the impacts of glyphosate spraying on deer populations and forest ecosystems. His advocacy has often placed him at the center of public debate. Now he's telling his story in a new book, Ignoring the Evidence: Glyphosate, Deer, and the Abuse of Power. Part memoir, part investigation, the book explores Cumberland's journey from growing up in Charlotte County as the son of a renowned deer hunter to becoming one of the province's most recognized critics of glyphosate use. Along the way, he examines the science, the politics, and the personal consequences of challenging powerful institutions. Today, Rod joins us to discuss the book, why he felt compelled to write it, and why he believes the conversation around glyphosate, forestry, wildlife, and public trust remains as important as ever. Rod, thank you so much for coming in today and sitting down with me. You're a familiar face around here as well. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Well, I know you quite well and have for years, but I'd love to have you start off by just telling our audience a little bit about yourself and why that inspired the book that you wrote. This very, very big and impactful book, as we're seeing.
Bullet-stopping book. Well, everybody loves a good story, and I've told stories most of my life, and I grew up, like you say, in Charlotte County. My dad was quite a storyteller and quite a hunter. So I wanted to put some of those stories, like there's some of the stories you almost don't believe they're true, like it was Charlotte County. So there's some really great stories, and some of them we can't publish, of course, because it would incriminate people. But no, I wanted to put that down. When I started writing, I guess, I don't know where we start this whole thing, but I grew up in Charlotte County, and I learned at an early age to love wildlife. And my dad loved deer. He loved to chase deer, and of course, as a little fella, I would go along with him. And it was, then again, you'd hear the stories at the supper table and stuff, you know, and he always harvested huge, beautiful bucks. And I just grew to love it. I just, like God puts you in the families He does for a reason, and I was there for a reason, and I didn't realize it at the time, but that was all grooming me for a career in that. My dream job was working with white-tailed deer, and eventually at 32 years old, I had my dream job, and was busy doing it. So that's, a lot of people know the Cumberlands from Charlotte County, and they know me from the lumberjack stuff, and so this is kind of a shout out to Charlotte County, the book. The first, it's kind of broken into 3 segments. So the first one is all about my upbringing in Charlotte County, and it's a lot of people will be able to relate to it. A lot of people will see themselves in the pages, and I do a lot of shout outs to people that were very influential in my life, like Bill Francis, who ran Valley Home Center and then Knock on Wood and now still works at Kent's, and Donnie Walker and Paul Sweeney, and there's lots of stalwart men in the county that really went above and beyond to give young guys a hand, and I really appreciated that. I think of Dave Peters and Peter Healis. There's a lot of them, a lot of really good quality guys. Alan Casey, and I just think back to all that. There was a lot of good guys. So it's a shout out to a lot of them and the role that they played in not only my life, but a lot of people's lives in Charlotte County as we grew up. And I recognize how blessed we were to have those guys in our lives. So the first part of the book is all about that. A lot of good stories, a lot of good hunting stories and stuff in there. It's pretty good. Like for outdoorsmen, they're going to love the book. And then of course the second part gets into the whole my career, the deer side of things, and how science has really been corrupted. Like I was a scientist, and a lot of people call me an activist and call me a whistleblower. And I'm a biologist. Like I was a certified wildlife biologist. That was my job, and I just felt like as a certified wildlife biologist, I had a professional responsibility to speak up when things were going sideways. So again, it had nothing to do with activism or anything else. I was doing my job in my mind. And of course, that's what made me lock horns with some big, powerful people. So, and I think the whole object, a lot of times they're able to intimidate the people that oppose them. And of course, when you read my upbringing and who raised me, you realize that tactic is not going to work with Rod Cumberland. So the more they said sit down and shut up, the more I said no, the people need to know the truth of this. So and then of course there was a point in time, like I did a lot of research and we tried to publish the paper, and when you read the book you realize what, because it actually came up in court, and they said, your paper got rejected. Well, yeah, it did, because the people I'm speaking out against are reviewing my paper. So if they're not going to put it where it needs to go in peer-reviewed stuff, then you can publish. I wrote a book. It's all in here. So you can't stop that, right? You can't stop the press on that. So really, this whole project is about truth-telling. In my mind, it's about truth-telling. So, and we can talk about some of that stuff, but there will subsequently be another book, because when we went to court, the truth didn't come out. We thought naively. I had a great chat with Terry Segay the other day about this whole thing, and he said, you're a typical you're a typical New Brunswicker. You were optimistically hopeful that the system was not corrupt. And I said, yeah, but the justice system, it can't be. He said, top to bottom. And I just was so surprised that that there wasn't justice. It was so one-sided, and it was discouraging, but it was eye-opening. That it's not going to happen. So I said, well, there's one other way to get the truth out there, and that's to write it down. Right. So that's what we did.
And like you said, this book is really for everyone. It's a love letter to Charlotte County as well, and stories in here that if you think it's all about glyphosate, it's so much more than that.
Oh,
but
yeah.
Nevertheless, I think it's important for us to touch on. I know that you're one of the first people I got to learn about glyphosate from when it became a question. I had too, and you and I have talked about this before, because a neighbor in Quebec, and I half grew up in Quebec, it's been banned in forestry for over 20 years. So I think that's important for people at home to see that this is something that another province right next door has made a very different decision about. But for people who don't know, and journalists I've talked to, some say, what is glyphosate? They don't know. I mean, there's other names for it, Roundup, let's say, right. And that is usually how I clarify it to people. But give people a background on glyphosate spraying and what it was that you noticed about it in relation to the deer population that caught your attention and made you pay more attention and research it.
Yeah, so glyphosate is funny, because most of us know it as Roundup, and you can buy it on the hardware store shelf, Roundup, and use it around your house to kill whatever you want to get rid of. And I always tell people the good thing about Roundup and glyphosate is it works really good. Like, it kills almost everything. The bad thing about glyphosate is it kills everything. So, really that's the good and the bad of it. It's very, very effective at what it does. And I really didn't know anything about glyphosate. Was not on my radar. I'm a deer biologist. I'm managing the provincial deer herd. But what happened back in the mid-2000s, I was the deer biologist, and back in the 80s we harvested, actually in Charlotte County here, all the Charlotte County guys will remember back in the 80s, we harvested 4,000 deer in Charlotte County alone. We harvested 4,000 deer a couple of years ago in the whole province. So Charlotte County is the breadbasket for deer in our province. We're the farthest south, we've got great forests, blah, blah, blah. So what happened is, as I pulled the levers forward and dropped the doe tags and tried to grow the deer herd back to 1980 levels, after 7 years, the first time it took 10 years, from 74 to 85 to go from a harvest of 4,000 to 30,000. We did the same thing from 2000, we harvested around 4,300, and then by 2007 we only harvested 10,000. And I thought, wow, good winners, all the levers forward, and we only went to a third of what we were just 20 years before that. And I thought, something is wrong. Why, what's happening? And then at the same time, that was when the forest industry was after more crown wood. So they want, and of course we had a lot of what we call the conservation forest. It was all crown land that was set aside for wildlife needs, and they wanted that. And of course a big chunk of that, almost 300,000 hectares, was deer yards. And on crown land, a lot of our deer yards were vacant. So the question was, and I was the deer biologist, like, why are our deer yards vacant? And it was at the same time I got a call, how ironically, from a Charlotte County guy, Ernie Hatt, worked for a DTI in St. George, and he called me up as a deer hunter. Said, hey, there's no deer around my camp. What's going on? So I went over to the other section that dealt with habitat and said, guys, what's going on down in Charlotte County? They say there's no deer around this area, and they printed off a bunch of maps and said, here, look, there's all kinds of habitat out there. And I could have gone back to my office like most government guys and sat down and said, okay, well, they think they know what's going on and everything's fine, but that's not the way I roll. So I said, okay, well, those are the maps, but he's saying there's an issue, so let's go look at it. So I'm a field person. So I went down and I trumped all those cuts, and it was it was surprising how much of this area down here was sprayed. It was planted and sprayed. So 70% of the stands were sprayed. And I said, wow, that's, typically all that was growing back in deer food. Now you've removed 70% of that from the deer diet because you've sprayed it and killed all the hardwoods. And I thought, well, this doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what's going on there around his camp. And then I went back and talked to the habitat guy. I said, hey, do you guys realize this? And then the excuses started. And that's when I was really surprised. I thought, no, there's, they've sprayed a lot of it. And it was like, no, well, all the rest of it's grown back good. It should be fine. And I said, well, no, the other stuff, there was a lot of rocky stuff. There was wet ground. There was ericaceous species. There was only like 10 to 15% that was decent at all for deer food. And they doubted me. They said, oh man, you must have been in the wrong spot. You must not. That's when all the excuses started. And I was surprised, because we were, Dan Kepi, I think back to university, like we were taught to be very vigorous in how you research stuff and know your data and research stuff well. And so I was surprised that they were given all these, what they say, glyphosate, hardwoods bounce back, it's not as bad as you think. And I was like, holy cow, where's all this coming from? Nothing was based on solid scientific research. So I started digging. I started digging then, and I said, no. So anyways, away it went. And then so that's a middle part of the book, is my big deep dive into the deer world and the glyphosate world. So glyphosate is the spray that they use to get rid of the hardwoods where they plant little green trees. And of course, it was very clear what was going on and how much it was changing the crown land forest out there. And it wasn't used nearly as much on private land, which is why there was a dichotomy in the deer growth. There was a lot more.
Perhaps why there's so many deer in St. Andrews would be an
example.
Okay.
Very good example. So all of a sudden then so I started realizing, wow, there's a little bit more to this glyphosate picture. So then I started looking into the research and what was done on glyphosate. And then, some names kept coming up. Lautenschlager was one of the names that kept coming up. He was a Canadian researcher. And he was the one that I eventually had the big debate with on Terry Segay's Information Morning on CBC, and I reference that in the book, and you can still listen to the interview, and it's a good one to listen to because, anyways, the more I dove into that deep rabbit hole of glyphosate, the worse it got. And I was really surprised and at how research was manipulated, at how the certain people were always the spokespeople for it and always saying everything was fine. And after a while, you started realizing, man, this is a little bit bigger ball of wax than little New Brunswick. So all of a sudden then, and of course at the same time, there's lawsuits in the States, and all of a sudden there's a lot of people down there that were getting non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and they were taking Monsanto to court and winning hands down because it is a known carcinogen. So, and there was a huge cover-up. So, thankfully in the States, the lawyers that went after Monsanto, they uncovered a lot of this. And then the other thing that came out of these, what are called the Monsanto papers, is all how they were fudging research and having them ghostwritten. And then some Canadian names started popping up in the Monsanto papers, like Len Ritter. And I was like, Dr. Len Ritter, he's the guy that's in New Brunswick all the time defending glyphosate use. So then I dove into who's Len Ritter, and all of a sudden, you go back 30 years, Len Ritter was the federal toxicologist that was sent to base Gagetown to tell everybody that Agent Orange was safe. How ironic is that? And here he is again, 30 years later, coming back from the cobwebs, and now he's in New Brunswick telling us how safe glyphosate is. And I thought, wow, how ironic is that? He was hired by the New Brunswick government to write the Chief Medical Health Officer's paper in 2016 saying everything's good with glyphosate, and I thought, wow, this guy's getting around. So anyways, glyphosate is it's a highly controversial compound and chemical because it works so well, and there's two totally divergent bodies of research on it. There's the peer-reviewed private research that says it's terrible, and then there's the industry-funded, short-term, short duration, says it's great. You know, so you have these two totally different.
And I'll interject to say that for, when I started looking to glyphosate as a journalist, there wasn't a lot. There really wasn't a lot. But what I did find was that Health Canada, at the time I was researching it, was using a study done by Monsanto to justify why it was fine. And that's caught my eye because it's obviously you need an independent study. That doesn't make sense for our country to be relying on a Monsanto study.
That's a very good point. And actually I bring that out in the book. And even further, just last year it was redacted because of the controversy around that, because it was a ghost written paper. So I think some people will find the book a little unnerving because we have our our go-tos. Everybody thinks Health Canada is reliable. They're looking after our health. Well, I do quite an expose on Health Canada and why they're not trustworthy. And I think it's quite an eye-opener to realize, wow, the games are being played at all levels. And Health Canada is a big one. And I mean, just now the federal government just changed that Bill 30, C30 and C31 basically is going to shut down that whole process. And now they're going to get around reviewing pesticides as regularly as they're supposed to. So I mean, things are happening all the time, and I think it's disconcerting when people realize that there's a bigger game being played out there, and there's a lot of people with a lot of money that are playing it, and we're just pawns caught in the middle of it, and that's what I was. I was a pawn caught in the middle of it. So I go back to teaching, and the third part of the book, of course, is what happens at the Forestry College. And there's a lot of guys down here that have gone to Ranger School. We always call it the Forest Ranger School, and it was renowned. It was world recognized for its excellence in education. And then that came under assault in the late, 2017, 18, 19, and I got caught up in the middle of that. And at the same time, we had a new boss. My bosses were always defending me for, I was able to have freedom of speech as a scientist, and then all of a sudden that kind of disappeared. So they saw the opportunity to get rid of a big problem that they had, and in 2019 the kid was gone.
Well, I think having been a journalist who attended your court case, I was in Burton, and I wasn't the only journalist there. There were a number of us in the audience, so that speaks to the fact that it wasn't quiet on the public front. Everyone was paying attention to see what would happen and what the outcome would be. And you had a lot of supporters from the community also there, driving up from Charlotte County in particular to follow along. Why did writing the book, was it cathartic in any way to be able to put it in your own words and tell people your full story from start to finish?
Well, the first thing I'll say, it's not the full story.
That's true. There's part two coming, I know, and it does end very abruptly.
There is part two coming. So this goes up to when I was fired, but so what it does do, because other than you and a couple of others, the media back then was controlled by a large conglomerate, and the word wasn't getting out. And I remember at the time, I had a great relationship with Thierry Seguin and a lot of people at CBC. We did 4 or 5 land and sea segments while I was a biologist. Things were really positive.
And there was a CBC journalist, Catherine. Why am I forgetting her last name? And she
was a big
emceed,
supporter.
I guess, hosted one of your specials on glyphosate that I attended.
Yeah. And I think you know as a journalist, like even journalism has changed. Like the investigative journalism used to be a big thing, and people would dig.
Like, I mean, I'll speak from our point of view. We do everything we can. We're a small outlet, but the big outlets, I mean, it's being cut.
Right.
Because also those are also the ones you need to defend the most with. You've got to have a big legal department too to make sure you can take on what comes. So I will say this as a journalist. It's really sad to see investigative journalism go out the window, and it's not the journalist's fault. There are many capable journalists ready to take on a story like this. If we could just get those people who are running the outlets to take that into consideration, and even our government to understand investigative reporting takes a lot of financing to be done properly, and right now we don't have a lot of that in Canada at all, and that's my whistleblowing on my end. Very sad. Back to you.
No, but you know what? I'm glad it carries a lot more credence coming from someone like you that's in the industry, because, and I've been saying that all along, we've lost that. So really, journalism has become now quite different, and I don't, people need to realize that, there's algorithms online, and, they find out what you like to read and listen to, and that's all you get sent. So you're just getting a one-sided story all the time. And I recognize that. So, all of a sudden I'm in court, and, I'm thinking, well, finally we're going to get the truth out. I mean, our whole reason for going to court was, number one, because there were still good instructors at the college that needed some support. Number two, the kids that were coming there, the students, somebody needed to speak up for them and make sure they get a quality education. So, and then of course, three, I was at the college since the mid-1980s. So, I mean, I knew all the guys that had invested so much time and effort and energy into making that a quality educational institution. So, I mean, I was going there, basically, I'm going to bat for other people. And I remember at the time people said, oh, he'll cave, he'll take the money, because a lot of people do when you start getting pressure by the big they start throwing you money, and they threw me a lot of money, saying, no, here, we'll settle out of court, we'll give you this money, And I said, no, it's not about the money for me. Like, it's never been about the money. It's about the truth. And I wanted to go to court to get the truth out. And of course, we did get a lot of it out in court. It never saw the light of day in the media. And of course, that'll come out in the next book. No one understands the behind the scenes, what's going on, but that's what happened there. So all of a sudden, we'd sit in court for 8 hours, and man, all the great evidence was coming out, and we thought, man, this is thank goodness it's gonna go our way. And you'd read the papers at night and you'd think, holy cow, I'm a scoundrel. I shouldn't be teaching at all, if you believe what you read in the CBC News. But again, that's the most discouraging thing for me is, what can you trust now? Like, who can you trust? If you can't trust government, and you can't trust industry, and you can't trust the media, who on earth can you trust?
Present company excluded,
Well, I would say exactly.
Well, I mean, we do a different type. We are very hyper-local, and that on top of investigative doesn't exist. Yeah.
I'm here because you do cover things legitimately, and I'm proud of you. Like, you do a great job here in Charlotte County, and I'm a big supporter of CHCO because you guys do a great job with media. You're one of the few independents that still give it the way it is, and that's what I really appreciate about you. So
thank you.
So anyways, the book is part of that. It's part of, some of it is that big paper I wrote to publish in a peer-reviewed paper. It never seen the light of day because the guys that I was talking about were the guys peer reviewing it, and then one of them just won. The other two were favorable, but one guy put it to bed, unfortunately. So all that was still there, and I thought that needs to be in the hands of the people. The people need to know what's going on the land that is supposed to be public land. Mm-hmm. So some of it's that. Then the other thing is about what happened at the college. There was a lot of people like, what went sideways at the college? And if you read the CBC News, you'd say, okay, well, there was, Rod was a scoundrel. That's what happened. No, that's not the story. So this is the story. This is what really went down at the college. And once you read it, you're able to see, wow, it's a whole lot more than we were let to know in the media. So the biggest thing about the book, and that I take a lot of time doing, is writing things chronologically. Because if you read what happened in court, is the lawyer would just throw in all this stuff totally out of context and totally out of chronological order, just to kind of make me look bad. But when you go through chronologically, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, you realize we're just trying to keep our heads above water in a sinking ship. And it wasn't that, I had an axe to grind with anybody. I was just trying to, say, hold it. You can't, this is a foolish decision. You can't do this. You can't let students drink on an overnight trip to Fundy Park. Are you crazy? So yeah, some of that. Anyways, without giving a lot of it away, that's.
I think you've raised a lot of intrigue, and so this
Right.
is why what I want to do is offer you a chance to come back again about this book. What I'd like to do is, because we're getting to the end of the show, and I feel like we've just started talking, is give people a chance at home to pick it up, and then we'll have questions come in from the public.
Oh,
if you'd
great.
be up for that, what we can
Oh,
do is
you
sort of
bet.
say, hey, if you're reading this book, Ignoring the Evidence by Rod Cumberland, tell us where you can get it.
Well, thankfully, again, I wanted it for sale down here in Charlotte County, so I just dropped off a box at the Whale downtown
The Whale
St.
Store, oh,
Andrews.
nice.
And then the Stationery Plus in St. Stephen are carrying. They've got a few boxes there, so there's books right there in St. Stephen and St. Andrews.
Now we've got a province-wide audience, so
Yes.
in the cities too. I think you did a
Yes.
book launch in Fredericton recently.
We did have a launch there. The Bookmark that's in Fredericton, Halifax, and Charlottetown are selling it. And then there's a lot of smaller, like in Woodstock, they're selling it there. A young girl in Harvey just started a bookstore there in the little strip mall going into Harvey. She wanted a box, so I dropped a box off this morning for her. So a lot of the small places are really keen. Partridge Island in St. John, we're hopefully going to do a signing there. So it's getting out pretty quickly as people are finding out it's.
That's wonderful. Okay, so what I'm going to say to people at home is if you are reading Ignoring the Evidence, please send us your questions for Rod. We'll have him back in a few weeks. I think it'd be nice to keep the hype going. So send those questions to news@chco.tv, or as many of you will anyway, just message me on Facebook and I'll make sure that they get on the show as well, because I think it'd be great for Charlotte County, who often, when you speak, many people show up. I've been to a number of your talks, and you have a great response from the audience. So it'd be great to have their questions addressed to you, that you can answer them here on this show. Thank you so much, Rod, for taking the time to come in today.
No, thank you, Vicki.
My guest today has been Rod Cumberland, author of Ignoring the Evidence. I'm Vicki Hogarth. Thank you for watching Southwest Magazine.
Southwest Magazine is a news and public affairs production of CHCO Television.